Hey nerds! Welcome to the React.js full course powered by React 19 and packed with real projects. Welcome back to episode 11 of our React series. If you were here for episode 10, you remember we met useMemo. And today we are meeting its twin sibling, which is useCallback, which doesn't remember values, it remembers functions. By the end of this video, you will know what useCallback actually is, why your React app sometimes re-renders for no reason, how to use useCallback to make things faster, and the difference between useMemo and useCallback. Also, a bunch of pro tips you won't hear in most tutorials. And at last, we'll build a real life mini project together. So let's jump in. Here in my app component, as you can see, I have a count state, okay, and also I have a child button component where I'm passing a increment function which is responsible to increase the count value. Okay, so this increment is going to this child button component as a prop, and in child button component we have a button, and on click of it we are calling this increment function. Okay, also in this app component we do have one button to change the theme from dark to light, right? So let's go to localhost and see what is happening here. So let me also open the console here. So let me increment the count value. It's incrementing. Also you can see it is rendering child button component, right? Let me clear it again. And now let's click on toggle theme. See, watch the console here. When I toggle the theme, child button is still re-renders. Okay, but nothing about it actually changed, right? So here in a child button component, I have this console, right? So that's printing whenever I'm clicking this theme button also. So this happens because in React, functions basically are recreated on every single render, even if they do the same thing. That's why the this child button thinks, hey, my prop is a new function now, so I would better re-render. This wastes performance. Imagine repainting your whole house just because you moved one chair. Okay, so here what happens, React recreates function on every re-render. Okay, so this every time React create this new increment function, and this children thinks that it is getting a new functions, means its prop getting changed. That's what this child button component is thinking, and then it cause the re-renders. So that's the issue. So how we can solve this issue? We have a React hook, which is useCallback. So useCallback is like saving a friend's phone number in your contact list. If you didn't save it, you would have to ask for it again every time, and it might even change. But if you save it, you will always have the same number, no matter how many times you have called. React does the same thing. It saves a function for you. So you are not giving your child components a brand new function on every re-render. So what is the definition of useCallback? useCallback is a React hook that returns a memoized version of callback function. It only changes if one of the dependency changes. Okay. So memorize means let me tell you, it is saved so we can use it later. Okay. So now let me show you the syntax of useCallback. So definitely we have to first import it from React. So here useCallback like that. Okay, and the syntax is here you have to store that callback result in a variable. So suppose const memoized function, this variable I have. Okay, so how you need to use? You need to use here useCallback. Okay, and here it returns a callback function, okay, like this, and it gives us a dependency array. So here I can pass dependencies, okay, and here within this curly brackets I can write our logic which we want to use it. Okay, so if this dependency don't change, React gives you the same exact function reference for last time. Okay, it's like saying, hey React, here is a function, okay, keep it safe and only make a new one if this dependency is getting changed. Okay, so now let's solve this re-rendering issue by using callback. Okay, so let me comment this syntax here. Okay, so how we can solve it? Here in increment function, as we have saw, we can wrap it by using use callback. So let's wrap it use callback. Okay, and here we do have this. Here we are incrementing the count value, right? That's what we had requirement. Okay, so let me just do one thing here. Instead of set count, let's get the previous value. Okay, so previous is equal to previous plus 1. Okay, so this is to change our count value. And let's close the curly brackets. Curly brackets here. Okay, and let's pass the dependency array here as an empty. So like this you can use. Okay, so use callback, you have this callback function where you are just calling this set count to increase the value. Okay, and after this callback function you have a dependency array. So I'll keep it empty because we are not changing the function. We don't want to change its reference, so it causes the re-render. So that's how you can use the callback here in increment function. So now let's save it and go back to localhost and try to change the theme. So let me refresh it. First let's try increment it. Okay, on increment it's working fine. So now let me clear the console again and try to toggle the theme. So you have noticed that it is still printing re-rendering on console even though we have used use callback, right? So now let's go to our app component again. And why this is happening? Because our use callback is doing its job. It's an increment gives the same reference between renders. Okay, but in React, any child component will re-render by default when the parent re-renders, even if the prompt didn't change. So to prevent that, you need to wrap the child with React.memo. Okay, so let's use memo here. And now let's wrap this child component to React.memo so that it doesn't cause the re-render. Okay, so let me convert this as a arrow function. Okay, and let's use memo here. Okay, here function like this. Okay, then we have this all callback, and let's at last return this. Now save it and go back to localhost, refresh it and try to toggle the theme again. So now you can see I am clicking the toggle theme button, but it is not rendering child component because we have used use callback, and with use callback I also need to use React.memo to prevent child from re-rendering. Okay, so that's how use callback helps you to stop re-render child when your function doesn't have changed. Now let me tell you the difference between use callback and useMemo. useMemo we have learned in episode 10, right? So let's come here and first let's comment it out so that I can explain, right? So let's like that. Okay, so here we have useMemo, right, which we have learned in episode 10, and now we have just learned use callback. So let's check the difference. First, useMemo remembers value. Okay, where your use callback, what we just saw, it remembers functions. Okay, that is the first difference. Second difference is obviously the syntax. So useMemo is like this callback function. Okay, then calculation, whatever we want to do, and the dependency array, right? This is the syntax we have learned for useMemo. And for use callback, what we just learned, use callback. Okay, then callback function of it, then function what we want to do, and the dependency array. So that is the syntax difference. Now useMemo is used for expensive calculations. Okay, whereas use callback is used for preventing functions recreation. So your React does not create new function every time it gets re-render. Okay, so basically useMemo is like a fridge for storing food, Whereas use callback is phone book for storing numbers. Numbers mean basically function. Okay, so this is the main difference between use memo and use callback. One remembers value, one remember function. Now let me tell you some pro tips which nobody tells you. Okay, so here tips. Okay, so first one is only use callback if you are passing a function to memoized child component. Means we saw, like, even though we have used use callback, but child was getting re-render. Okay, means we have not used child in child React.memo. So that is the first tip. Always pass or use callback. Okay, when your child has React.memo. Okay, then only your use callback will work. Second thing, if the child component isn't memoized, use callback won't prevent re-render. Okay, so if child has not used React.memo, then even use callback won't work. We already saw. Okay, third tip is always include all dependencies. Okay, so do not miss any dependency in this array, otherwise your function or your use callback will not work perfectly fine. Okay, the fourth tip is don't wrap every single function in use callback. So basically, overusing it can actually slow your app down because React still has to compare the dependencies, right? So do not use for every single functions. Only use it when it's necessary. When it is any function is passed down to a child component as a prop and causing the re-render. Okay, then only use it, not for every single function. Otherwise, overusing will make your app slow instead of fast, right? Fifth tip is functions inside components are not evil. Okay, only optimize if you notice real performance issues. So if you're facing real performance issues, okay, then only use callback. Okay, do not just for showing that you know the coding of React, just use the use callback. If you are really facing the performance issues, then only use. Sixth tip is basically a bonus secret. You can use callback with event handlers that depends on state. If you pass a function updater like set state with previous value, that way you can often leave the dependency array empty without breaking things. So here you saw I kept it empty because I have used on the same way. Okay, here I have used previous value I am changing. So that's why I kept the dependency array empty. Okay, because here I'm passing use callback I'm using with the event handler that depends on this count state. Okay, so that is the sixth tip. Seventh one is, okay, let me write the sixth one here also. So use callback with event handlers that depends on state. If you pass a function updater like we have already saw, right, like previous one. Now 7th tip is another pro move, basically combining use callback with useMemo when your function returns a calculated value that itself is expensive to compute. Okay, so here if suppose in this increment function we had some calculation which is too much expensive. Okay, like it's taking so much of time. So then in that case we have to also memorize the value and also we have to memorize the function. So in that case we can use both use callback and use memo. Okay, so we can combine use callback with use memo. Okay, so we can use both. There is no anything like we have to only use one. We can use both on our requirement. Okay, so Eighth tip is, if you are working with context or redux selector, use callback can stop your selector from rerunning unnecessarily. So it helps when you are using context and redux selection. Okay. So use callback, stop rerunning selectors in context or redux. Okay, so these are some tips which you will not find on every other YouTube video. Okay, so I hope that these tips are helpful. It's mini project time. Okay, so we'll make in this project we'll make a small task manager basically. Okay, so with a parent component holding all the tasks and a memoized child which will holding the task list. So we'll use callback. So removing or adding a task doesn't re-render everything when unrelated state changes. Okay. So basically we'll have a parent component which will have a task state. Okay. And also we can add new task or remove the task. And also we'll have a theme button to change it. Okay. And we'll have in parent component, we'll have a child component which will only be responsible to render the task we have in parent component. Okay. So now let's create. So for that, let's remove everything from here. Okay. Let's remove this, make this div empty. And also let's remove everything from here. Let's save it. Okay. Now we are ready. So as I told, we will be needing basically we have to create a task manager. Okay, so we need a state to store the task user have created. Okay, so basically we need a state, so let's create it. So const task state. Okay, its setter function will be set task. Okay, and basically it will be use state of, it will be a type of array. Okay, and each task will be a separate object so that we can keep the ID and text of it. Okay, so it will have, by default I'll give some task already here, suppose ID1. Okay, and text is let's create a learn React, right? And also let's create a second task. Let's just copy it, copy, comma, paste. ID will be now 2 and text will be watch episode 11. Okay, so these are the two tasks by default I do have. Okay, now let's come in div. Okay, here I'll give first a heading tag as always, the project name task manager. Okay, and here I need a input where user will be adding a task, basically typing the task text, and a button to add the task. Okay, so let's create an input first. So input type will be text. Okay, and placeholder I'll keep it as a task. Okay, so on input we need to store whatever the user is typing into a state, right? So let's create a state, new state basically, which will be const new task and set new task. In this state I'll store the value whatever the user is typing in this input box. Okay, so let's, by default input will be empty, right? So now let's give the value here as a state name. Value will be of this input will be new task. Okay, and on change of this input we want to set the whatever the user have typed into this new task. Okay, so let's give on change function here. On change will get the event and will set whatever we are getting. So set new task will be event dot target dot value. Okay, so now we do have this input box. Now after user types we need to a button, so on click of that we can add this task to our task list. Okay, so let's create a button here. Okay, I'll name it as add, and we need a on click function here, right? So on click I'll name it a new function as a add task. Okay, so we have not created add task, so let's come here and create the add task function. So const add task. Okay, it will be arrow function. here first I need to check if user has typed means user has typed anything, then only I want to add, otherwise I want to return. Okay, so let's check if this new task value is empty. Okay, so new task, let's trim it. Okay, so spaces can be removed, trim. If it is empty, then I don't want to add it, so just return it. Okay, see, if user have typed something, okay, then in that case I want to add that object, new task object into this task array. Okay, so let's do set task. Okay, here I'll get the previous value because I want to keep the previous states also. Okay, I just do not want to reset everything. Okay, so here let's spread operator copy the previous values, and here now let's a new object with our new task. So id for now let's keep date dot now. Okay, it will, for now I'm just getting the date and time of now whenever user will be clicking. Okay, and so basically in text whatever user have typed, so in this new task we are keeping, right? So let's in text assign the new task, right? So this is how we will be adding task into our set task state. Okay, after user have added, we want to reset the input value. Okay, so let's also do that. Set new task, make it empty. Okay, that is about adding a task. Now let's create a child which will basically responsible to render task list. Okay, so let's create a child component here before this app component. Let's create a task list component. Okay, so I'll name it as a task list. Okay, and I'll keep this as a basically we'll use a React.memo here. So we already saw, right? So it doesn't cause the re-render. So memo. Okay, here I'll use function. I'll name it as a same task list. Okay, basically a new component as a task list. Now here to render the task list, we want to get the task, right? So task I'll pass from this as a prop to this child component. Okay, so let's give this task. Okay, and here after this let's do return. Let's add a console also so that we can track if it is re-rendering or not. The rendering task. Okay, I'll just add up the console. Now here just return the list of the task. Okay, so return a UL tag. Okay, and let's map through the task dot map. Okay, here I'll get each task. I'll name it as a ta. Okay, because task I already used. So for each of the tasks, let's return a list item li. Okay, here in ta, what I'll render, let me add parenthesis here, and also after this. Okay, oh sorry, here. Okay, so every task has a text, right? So let's return the task dot text. Okay, and also let's pass each of the list item app unique key, which will be basically task dot id. Okay, so now let's go to console and check what it is rendering. So let's refresh it. Okay, it's not rendering because we have not used this task list in our task app component yet. Okay, so let's use this here. Let's use this child component, and here we have to pass task as a prop, right? So that it can render. So let's pass task is equal to task. Okay, now let's go console. So here you can see it is printing both the task we already have created. Okay, so now let's add a new task here. So first, before typing anything, let's try to add. It's not adding, right? Now let's add something like episode 11 something. Okay, now let's try to add. As you can see, we have added and our rendering task component, basically it's getting re-rendered. Okay, now let me create one more button here to remove the task. Okay, so let's come here, and that button I want to keep in my this child component. Okay, so let's create a button on click, and on click of it I want to basically I will be removing this task from our uh, this task array. Okay, so for that what I'll do, I'll create a function here in parent component and pass down that function to remove to child so that child can use it. Okay, so here let's from props, let's destruct on remove. I'll name it on remove. I have not created it, I'll create it after this. Okay, so suppose I have passed on remove, which is responsible to remove the task from a task list. Okay, so on remove I will be passing task dot id so that we can remove that particular task. Okay, so name it as remove. Okay, so this is what we do have in list. Okay, so you have noticed it should come within the each of the list item. Okay, so here I want to use, right? Now let's create on remove function in parent component. Okay, so here let's come on remove const remove task. Basically I'll create remove task. Now this function I want to pass to this child component. Okay, but every time when we'll be removing, our app component will reload, and React will think again, means React will again recreate this remove task function, so our task list will re-render unnecessarily. So to solve that, we already saw we can use useCallback. Okay, so instead directly just creating a function here, let's use useCallback first. useCallback. Okay, here, then in callback I'll get the id of the task here what I'm passing. Okay, so now this is the function I want to execute. Okay, and here set let's remove, means basically let's filter out from previous. Okay, so previous dot filter, then task. Okay, if task dot id is not equal to whatever the id I'm getting, then only return that array. Basically we are filtering out from our task array the result which user have not clicked. Okay, so let's load that, and here pass the dependency array. And now this remove task, let's pass it to its task list child component. Okay, so on remove, let's pass it remove task. Okay, so now let's go back to our here localhost, refresh it, and let's try to add some random text here. Add. Okay, so as you can see it is being added, and also edit. And now let's try to remove some. So as you can see, whenever I'm adding or removing, it is getting re-rendered. Okay, but now let's add a theme button, same as in previous problem we saw, and on click of that, let's see if it is re-rendering our child component or not. So let's go to app component here, and let's create a state for theme. Okay, so const theme, set theme, and use state. For now I'll keep the default value as light, and here just let's create one more button. Okay, to change theme, and on click of it, I want to set theme. What I want to set in the theme, if theme is equal to light, then set it to dark. If it is dark, then set it to light. Okay, so this is one button I have added so that we can test if it is re-rendering even if you are calling this button or not. Okay, so let's go back here, refresh it again, and let's remove it first. So as you can see, it is rendering the task list component. Okay, so that is working fine. Now let's test it by clicking on this change theme. So see, here I'm clicking this change theme button multiple times, but as you can see, task list components is not getting re-render. Why? Because we have used useCallback with child component, we have used useMemo. Okay, so in that way, React useCallback hook helps us to stop the unnecessary re-rendering of the child component. So that's it. Recap time. What we have learned today. So first we have learned what useCallback is. Then we have fixed unnecessary re-renders caused by function props. Then we have compared useCallback with useMemo. Then we have discovered pro tips that most devs don't talk about. And at last, we built a task manager using useCallback. So useCallback is not magic bullet, but when you use it with React.memo, it's like giving React a cheat sheet, so it doesn't redo work which is already done. Coming up next, in next episode, we are diving into useReducer, the hook that makes managing complex state feels like you have just unlocked React secret boss level. You will learn when to use useReducer instead of useState, how to organize state transition with action and reducers, real world example to clean up messy state logic. Trust me, after this one, you will feel like the state management wizard your app deserves. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the React magic flowing. See you in next episode, nerds.